Joining me in the studio right now are two incredible entrepreneurs that do a lot of important work in the area of well-being. I've got Asha Ghosh and I've got Connor McManus in the studio. Welcome.
Thank you.
Awesome. Great to have you here. So, we've got an interesting conversation to have around the subject matter of well being. I look forward to it. But first of all, I want to hear about you guys. So, what's your business? Asha, let's start with you.
My business is called The Honest Partnership. I am a leadership coach, and my primary thing is I enable women, and senior professional women, to unleash potential that they haven't untapped before, so that they can lead, inspire, and I've always said to be the leaders that we've never had, and so that they can take their teams, their business, and their lives as well to find joy and satisfaction.
That is interesting. I mean, that's what we want to hear, particularly on this segment, because I think you're going to bring a lot of great perspective to this
Thank you.
conversation. Connor, how about you? Tell us about your business.
So, my name's Connor McManus. I'm the founder of a business called The Collective, and we're a digital health organisation, and we partner with other organisations to support their team. So, to keep it nice and simple, we have a team of personal trainers, physiotherapists, nutritionists, and therapists who look after, in a one-on-one coaching format, the employees of organisations. So, like as you know, and as the conversation is about today, it's a massive talking point at the moment, and we go straight to the source. We provide employees with the support they need directly from the person that they need, given their particular problem, challenge, or their goal at that moment in time.
Fantastic. So, let's get right into the conversation. Wellness. What does it mean?
I think there's lots of connotations about what it means. And I think one step back is actually mental health because they have this, they're interconnected. And the World Health Organization talks about mental health being when somebody isn't physically ill, but they actually have the agency to be there to reach their own potential and for themselves, their families, and their kind of community. And where well-being comes in is like Gallup did last year a poll about what they understood it to be, and they had like kind of 5 areas, and it was sort of like physical kind of well-being, financial well-being, your environment, how your community, as well as your personal and mental health. And so when we start looking at that, it's actually quite a complex thing, and it's a word that gets used quite a lot, but I don't think it's always fully realised and fully understood, which is why I wanted to take a step back, because when somebody is happy and healthy, one area of their life could still be quite challenging. So, and I think that's where the complexity comes in.
And I think that's quite interesting, which is why kind of in your instance, you've literally taken the word well-being, looked at all the different connotation, and built a business around a segment of it. What does well-being mean for you?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, right? Like you said, like the word, like wellness, well-being, both the words have got a lot of mileage, and they both mean a lot of different things to different people. The way, like, there's 2 great ways of explaining it that I've heard. I'll try and relay both to you, and you can like work out, and the audience can work out whichever they think is best for them. So there's a spectrum of wellness. So if you imagine on the far left-hand side, you've got illness, and the far right-hand side, you've got fitness, and the middle, you've got wellness. So you can, as an individual, sit somewhere on that spectrum. If you consider yourself to be in great shape, both physically and mentally, you'll be more towards the fitness side. You'll have great physical fitness and great mental fitness. And if you consider yourself to be not so strong in certain areas, you'll be leaning more towards the illness side. And that's where we start to see people starting on that patient journey where they need to go to the GP and so on and so forth. The other analogy that we use, which I use more often, which I think is great, is like your wellness is like a bit at the table, and you've got your different legs of that table. So one of the legs is your recovery, one of the legs is your mental health, one of it is how much you exercise, one is your diet. And then if you start to pull away those legs, or if they're weak, eventually, if you pull enough of those legs away, the table will topple over. And that's how like the table is your wellness, right? If you've got good, strong base for all of them, your table is in great shape. But if you start struggling in certain areas, eventually your overall wellness is going to topple over.
I totally agree that that is one of the most amazing analogies I've heard to literally describe this concept of wellness. Now, let's begin to narrow down a bit. We want to focus on wellness in the workplace. In the context of working and professional life and life as entrepreneurs and business people, what have you seen in terms of the trends concerning wellness, whether that be from a problem standpoint or from a solution standpoint?
I think It's quite different for lots of different people. What you're saying there is, and the word spectrum is exactly the right terminology, because people can experience low levels of stress if they, for example, want to change their job and they feel that there's some risk in their lives, or they're going for a promotion. There is a level of pressure. That's what the initial part of stress is, a pressure. And then as you sort of move along the spectrum, then that pressure kind of builds up. And it might be that an example I had last week was when somebody wasn't getting the promotion that they wanted, and they didn't understand, and it was starting to actually manifest in them into not being able to sleep, and then actually their physical well-being then goes down. They can't look after their families, they're not eating well, and that starts to build into anxiety, where actually you worry and you start to kind of feel much more, and those feelings cut out your ability to be productive, and then that sort of challenges
you.
you.
Got that snowball effect.
Yes, absolutely.
And you just graduate if you don't pay attention to it. What about you, Connor? What have you seen in that dimension?
Yeah,
in the workplace?
Again, it's a tricky one, right? Like, it's such a broad subject. I mean, the simplest way that like we try and look at it is that the workplace predominantly, if it's going to have a negative effect on wellness, it's going to be your mental health, because in the majority of workplaces, not all, but in the majority of workplaces, the pressure, the stress, the weight will come in like a psychological format. You know, there aren't that many jobs left out there now where we're asking people to work like 12, 14 hours days in physical environments. So then that means the support we need to be putting in place is related to mental health. Like, what support mechanisms can we put in place that's going to protect people from that rising stress input? So we need to have the support mechanism for the stress output, like around mental health. However, there's a problem with that. The problem is that we now know that mental health and physical health is really connected. So if the outcome of physical health and mental health is connected, then the inputs that we put in place, the support mechanisms, also need to be physical and mental health. And this is where it gets complicated. We end up just going around in circles. But ultimately, like, our perspective is that, forgetting about the workplace for a moment, like if you have an individual and you want to support them with their overall well-being, what mechanisms would you put in place? You'd put in support around that, like their exercise and their diet and their mental health. Yep. So in reality, like, a business is just made up of many individuals. Yep. So you just put the same mechanisms in place, but you do it for all the individuals at scale.
It's quite interesting when you look at all the different verticals that has to be taken care of in order to consider, a person to be well, or consider an organization to be one that have put in place the infrastructure that is required to keep, the employees in very good shape. The question that I have, then I'm going to start back with you, Connor, on this one, is whose responsibility is it? Right? Is it the employee's responsibility, or is it the employer's responsibility?
It's both, right? Because we want to have a body, and it's our responsibility to look after that body. Otherwise, as we get into later stages of life, things start to go wrong, and we don't want to do that. So we need to think forwards. It's like a savings account. The more you invest into it now, the more you benefit from it in the future. However, from like a productivity standpoint, like there's very little argument against the fact now that, like, if people are healthier, they are more productive. If people are more productive, the organization benefits. There is like a caveat to that, and that is, like, we're in a cost of living crisis, as we all know. So if you can alleviate the disposable income burden of spending your disposable income on physical and mental health product support, expert support, so on and so forth, by you as an organization paying for them, then like it's double-sided, right? Like, they're going to be more productive, and it's a benefit to the employee because it's another reason for them to work at your organization.
Interesting. And what are your thoughts on that, Asha?
I'm going to challenge part of it.
Oh, great. This is what I love.
Not because I disagree with actually what you're saying is, but the business model you have doesn't necessarily need to look at the organizational structure. It doesn't need to look at the culture. It just doesn't have to. That's so it's not part of your business need. But actually, when you're team coaching, I've had a conversation with a client recently, and they have a team of 8, and 70% of them have mental health issues. And I think most of them are actually on antidepressants in some shape or form, or some sort of, and one of them has a psychosis. Where does the burden end for them? And actually, as a leader, because I've been coaching the team and the leader themselves, there is this tension between them of, actually, the sole responsibility of me is keeping this team together. And where the organizational challenge comes in is when we're looking at it systemically, which is you would look in team coaching, is What's around that team? Well, it's a culture that actually puts pressure in a particular way. The actual organizational structure is quite hierarchical, and so people don't feel they can voice their concerns in the way, so they don't have psychological safety. The team structure itself by no means anyone's fault, is just sort of sat in this giant pyramid scheme where they don't feel they have an automated kind of pressure. And then if you then have poor leadership, a client I spoke to on Friday genuinely said the toxicity in her team was unreal, and she felt the need to protect, almost put like a band in front of them. So she was fronting the toxicity with the
And
fear.
taking it on.
Yes. So, but then her mental health was being challenged, and how that was manifesting is she couldn't really, when she got home, she couldn't look after her children. She was absolutely shattered.
And I think like that's a valid point, right? So I think like there are certain workplaces where the weight of the environment, the culture, the toxicity, the pressure, the stress is so large that there are no mechanisms you can put in place that's going to combat that. So then when that happens, like, yeah, you're right. Like it's just an organizational
It's a
burden,
culture
and,
problem.
and that's a big problem to have, right?
If HR isn't there and they haven't got, and HR can be an amazing thing. It can have lots of different functions and facets. But if HR isn't sort of able to influence the policy or get a strategy that runs all the way through the organisation, rather than just being a vertical of like we support it, it has to be a silver lining that's through it, then you have real challenges, because occupational health and HR are kind of the last thing. It's a tick box kind of exercise, and part of my job is sort of like the stopgap of when people are actually no longer, the pressure's too much and I no longer have anyone in that environment to enable me.
So that essentially calls into question what business leaders are doing in order to, look at the internal culture that they've got to make sure that it is an enabling environment for the employees to be productive. So that's great. But how about instances where, because we talk about stress, anxiety, and mental health issues and things of that nature, it's not always, those pressures don't always come from the workplace. Yes, everybody works, they belong to one organization or the other to certain degrees, but some of these pressures could be pressures that have come from personal life, personal instances, marriages, children, education, all sort of different things that could potentially happen in life. To what degree is it incumbent on the businesses to make sure that regardless of where the pressure is coming from, the business bears the responsibility of taking care of the people?
I mean, that is the question that I've just posed, but that my client has. I don't think there's a simple yes, no type of boxed up answer that you can have there. For each life stage that we have, various different things happen. So, for example, at the moment, I've got women who are perimenopausal or menopausal. They're also, at the same time, they've got elderly parents and they've got teenage children. I mean, that in itself, and they've got a high pressure job. That in itself is just like, and the pressure is coming from a lot. And so who owns that bonus, that onus in there is quite difficult. Back to where your sort of service becomes brilliant is that sometimes it takes the pressure of having to think away, and somebody else takes, in the same way as I do, is I'm now partnering with somebody, and some of that pressure can be taken away. And in just taking away something like, actually I can feel a bit fitter, or I can having proper sleep, is the start of them being able to deal with all aspects of that. So, but back to so that I see is a great connection for whole organisations. But back to whose responsibility it is, I don't think there's an answer. So, I know I'm taking over, but I spoke to somebody from the police force last week, and they're talking about, and you were saying about physical. It can be something like not getting their holiday signed off, and then they're completely like, but actually it's a long history of all sorts that have happened, and this is the thing that sort of breaks the camel's back, if you like. So I don't think it's as simple. It depends how it happens, how it manifests, and how it appears.
It is very contextual. And what are your thoughts on that, Connor, in terms of where does that lie and what should organizations be doing, if anything?
Yeah, I think I'll keep it really short and simple. I think it's the wrong question. I think the question is, does it benefit the business to support an individual when they are having their own personal challenges? Yeah, of course it does. Like that's removing the whole empathy and compassion part of the equation. From a purely pragmatic standpoint, the business will benefit if the individual is more happy. So it's not their responsibility, but like from a commercial standpoint, it's a great decision.
It makes business sense.
Yeah,
essentially.
exactly.
Now, there's an interesting point I want to pick up on based on what you've just talked about. You know, when we have these conversations, the picture in our mind for the most part are always, you know, businesses that are established, they're doing really well, you know, they've got like a good amount of staff and they've got the resources to take care of them. But that is not the majority of businesses. Most businesses are small businesses trying to make it work one way or the other. And the more we have this conversation, and it's great that we're having this conversation about the need for proper, you know, mental health support for employees. But to some entrepreneurs that are not as big, you know, these are literally small businesses, medium-sized businesses. For them, it becomes a question of how much more do we need to spend on these people? You know, because we're paying them already, we're paying taxes, we're paying insurance, we're paying all those things on behalf of our employees. Now, there's this responsibility again around mental health. Now, is that a justifiable thinking for small businesses? And if that thought is there, how do they navigate their
It's a tricky one, right? Like there's no right or wrong answer to that. It depends if the business is a startup and like they're trying to grow and expand, because if they are, they may have tons of capital, and investing in their team early is definitely a good decision. If they're just an SME that operates at a low staff level, it depends on their margins and so on and so forth. But there are solutions out there that can put in place. Like, for example, we built part of our service in a way that it can be accessed by smaller businesses, and we charge on a per person basis so that they're not lumped with a massive fee when they haven't got a massive workforce. And so like, we considered that when we built the business. But I understand the problem. But then like, if you're starting a business, you know, you know what you're getting in for, and that's one of the problems that you're getting in for.
And what are your thoughts on that, Asha?
I mean, going back to organisations themselves, when you set up, you have visions and values of how you want to be and how you want to be treated and how you want to treat other people. And if you start to put profit above that, then you are going to be challenged about how your business is going to grow, how your culture is going to grow, how you are going to be perceived. And so if you kind of start on that mindset where it's becoming more challenging, then I think growth is more difficult, and how you then get loyalty can be more challenging. And in growth, what you need is your people to sort of be there with you and feel your vision, have the purpose with you. And so to feel the financial pain initially, I think is prohibitive and reductive for growth.
It's quite interesting, this conversation, because there's so many different ways we could look at it. Now, think about it in this context. I am a small business owner, and I'm thinking, okay, I've got to hire staff. I want to do right by people. I want to make sure that I take care of the mental health and all this, you know, well-being support for my staff. But I look at the numbers and I say to myself, this is not attainable. Do you think that, and when we take a look at it, actually there's a lot of social attention to the subject matter, so much so that, you know, even if it's not convenient for you, you can go out there and say, you know what, I'm not taking care of my employees, let everybody go find their own ways. You can't do that as a business owner. Do you think you would ever get to a point where business owners are just going to say, you know what, I'm not going to hire, I'm just going to look for technological alternatives?
I think it's interesting. I'm not sure whether you want to go all the way there. I've worked in tech, and tech can be incredible for filling certain aspects of your business and providing automation and moving things on. But going back to your original point, you know, should I be thinking in this kind of way? If you as a business owner are thinking about your own mental health, then you are more likely to increase how you are,
Absolutely.
How you show up for your team, how you prioritize, you know, what time you go home from work, when emails are kind of responded to. And if you show that you have hygiene factors, like that you employ somebody like these guys, or actually you have like a health routine and there's healthy food in the fridge and all of those types of things, then it's sort of passing down.
It translates.
Absolutely, it's
into
a
the
ripple
culture.
effect. Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a fair point, right? Like if you're a high performance individual, you want people around you to be high performers. And as a result of that, like you'd invest in that process. But I think no, like I think that we're only going to move closer and closer and closer towards having like healthy workforces. I think well-being has been very guilty of being very ambiguous. So people like they feel the pressure, but they don't really know what it looks like. And what I think we've really tried to do is like be very candid and very straight to the point and try not to be ambiguous about what we offer.
Great.
And I think as education becomes more so, people can draw the dots between productivity and healthiness, then people will see it like investing in a accountant for your organization, because it gets a point where you just can't handle it. There will come a point for you where you have to invest in X solution that's going to help your team be more productive. And I know, again, that's not very like a compassionate way to look at things, but from a commercial standpoint, we're moving closer and closer towards that.
Okay.
And that it's a good long-term strategy.
Absolutely, it definitely is. But then, as a last question, I want to flip very quickly and go to the employee's perspective. Do you think there's ever a point where, people take this too far? Because we've seen instances where companies provide, sleeping areas and games area and lounging areas, and end up only getting like 3 hours of work in the day from the employees because they're leveraging all this mental well-being, assets that the company has provided. Do you think there's a risk that, sometimes people take this too far, and is there a thing that organizations can do in order to combat that? Do you want to start?
I think, look, I think you see that mostly in the big boys like Google, Facebook,
the big tech
and whatnot. And they've got so much like fat on their business that they can afford to do that, because if one person sleeps all day, then the business isn't going to fall over. Smaller business, that might not be the case. I think that ultimately, no matter what you put in place as an organization, the employee will always have to make the decision. So I think you can't force solutions on your employees, because they may not care and they may not be interested in living a healthy lifestyle. So there's definitely opportunities where you can push too much onto your employees, because they need to be able to participate and want to participate in the solutions that you provide them. Can it go too far? I don't think you can ever really go too far, but what you can do is try and force something upon your employees and initiatives upon your employees that they don't want and need, or they're just not educated enough about, so they don't know that they want it yet. I think that's definitely a possibility, but you'd rather have too much than too little.
Interesting. And Asha?
I think some of these things you kind of have to test out. I know I went to a business meeting a couple of weeks ago, and somebody was raving about the fact that they had the initiative they could take as many holidays in the year. My partner works in an agency, and they did that for 2 years, and no one took any more holiday than they were given. So, and no matter how much education they gave about how that could help you, it just didn't work. So I think some things need to be tested out. Some things kind of work for certain environments, some things don't. Yeah. And it's the purpose of why that's put in place. I think some of these things put the onus on the employee too much as well, to be fit, to be healthy, maybe I don't want to be fit, maybe I don't want to be healthy. Maybe I can be productive without some of those things. Maybe employees shouldn't tell me how to be, but actually if they produce an environment that I feel safe, psychologically safe, and I feel I can use my voice, maybe that will enable me in a different kind of way. So I don't know in that way. And I think if you read some of the reports from Google, I don't think people used a lot. And some of the things were there to actually lessen the amount of hours you went home, like having crashes on site is brilliant, but actually there were tech companies encouraging women to freeze eggs and doing all sorts of things so that they would work longer.
So there are limits to how, essentially, the conversation about mental health and well-being generally in the workplace is not going to end here. It's literally to stimulate more conversation so that you could participate as well. Please make sure that you participate in this conversation, share your thoughts on social media and the rest of those. But I'm going to leave it at that right now because I don't want to take too much of your time. But thank you very much, Connor and Asha, for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for watching. It has been an amazing show today. We've been broadcasting live from the Liquid Media Center right at the heart of Birmingham, and it has been truly remarkable. Remember, you could always catch the show on bbtv.live, and also it's available on YouTube. If you've got questions or you'd like to be a part of the show, feel free to reach out to us. But before we go, we want to get into our 90 seconds with. Who's that going to be with? Stay tuned to find out.